Due to the current federal state emergency declarations and guidelines for social distancing due to COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting of the Monteville School Board is conducted in accordance with Minnesota statutes. Meetings by telephone or other electronic devices. Persons may monitor this meeting from a remote location by going to the following link. It's www.youtube.com channel UCLQQY capital M KGX TLUUR UGH or HGH KGH Q question mark view and then AS subscriber. Roll call. Brian.
Here.
Helgeson.
Here.
Goober.
Here.
Snell.
Here.
Balking. Here. Stenson.
Here.
Thank you. Superintendent Heller.
Here. The others are all out.
Okay. Explanation of call. Dr. Heller will explain the call.
Okay, first, I do want to mention that people that are watching the YouTube live stream may submit comments by going to and opening their email and sending an email to addresstheboard@montevideoschools.org. The addresstheboard@montevideoschools.org. After the meeting, later after the meeting, Mr. Ripley will make the credentials available to all the board members, so you'll have the opportunity to go in and read any comments or suggestions that anyone has made. But it is not an interactive meeting as such. The call of the meeting is to have a board work session to review the latest executive order 20-82 to discuss information relative to the reopening of school for 2020-2021 school year and to discuss the renewal of the operating referendum. There is no formal action planned on any of the discussion topics on the agenda during this meeting.
Thank you. Approval of agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Maggie?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Andrew. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, answer by saying aye. Or should we do a roll call?
Roll call.
Okay, Kelly,
Aye.
Joel,
Aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
Maggie,
Aye.
Travis,
Aye.
Darren is, aye. Discussion items 2.1. Dr. Ellie, you wanna?
Okay, I thought what I would do would be to go through the topics that I have highlighted on the agenda and kind of hit upon some of the keys within each of those. And then while I'm on that, we can go ahead and if you have questions, wish to discuss on that, we can discuss on that rather than going through all of it and jumping back and forth around it.
Sure.
So all of this is based upon the guidelines that came out following the issuance of Executive Order 20-82, the reopening of school for the fall of 2020 to 2021 school year. The rumors that came out as we were approaching the governor's address or press conference last Thursday really indicated that there was a lot of belief that there was going to be complete local control given. Frankly, I don't think anybody in St. Paul believes in offering local control to school districts throughout the state. But rather than having local control, it was really having local data. And they did give us a rubric of sorts that MDH came out with. And the rubric is based upon a 2-week time frame and the number of positive test results during that time period. Out of all of the tests that have been run, how many were positive during that time? And they showed for each of, I believe it was about the past 3 or 4 2-week time frames. Based on the last data that was compiled, the most recent, both Chippewa and Lackaparra counties had very low numbers during that 2-week time period. And based on that, both of those districts, the districts within those counties, would be looking at having everyone in person. Elementary would be in person, secondary would be in person. Yellow Medicine, which also we touch at that county, had a surge recently. And so even though they have fewer cases throughout the whole history of keeping the records, during that 2-week period, they were higher than 10. And so they fell into the elementary would be in person and the secondary would be hybrid. Last Saturday, I was on a webinar and they indicated that if we had land in other counties within our school district, we had to take into consideration all of the counties, and we had to go with the most restrictive county, which for us, in this situation, that would be Yellow Medicine, what their figures were. And so based on that, it would move us into starting school with the elementary in person and the secondary on hybrid. Now, that having been said, once we get more data from the Department of Health and from Countryside Public Health, depending upon where the cases are in Yellow Medicine County, we could appeal that to the Commissioner of Education and get some of that waived. So, for example, Minneota sits off with some of their district going over into, I think it's Lincoln County? Lyon County. Yep. Lyon County. Lyon County had a tremendous surge. And that would have placed Minneota in a much higher category than what they're at. They made the case that those were all over in the Marshall area. They didn't have the connection into that area that would really impact the students in their schools. They wouldn't be necessarily bringing all of that in. And the commissioner concurred with them and allowed them not to consider Lyon County's numbers in there. So you can appeal that, but initially you have to look at it that that's where you start. That's your starting point. And then once you get more data, if it's possible to appeal something, you can certainly make an appeal on that. So right now, ours would look like, for a baseline, we would be starting the school year with our elementary being in person and our secondary being in hybrid. That's where kind of where the data takes us on that. And we'll be getting more information as we go through the week, and we have our conversations, for example, with Countryside and MDH as to where some of those are.
What's the review cycle on the data? So like, we're a few weeks away from school. How many times is it going to change between now and then?
Okay, so they take they will post data changes Thursdays weekly. And so you get kind of a rolling period, but once we get to that next 2-week period, then we would be looking at that. Now, then you can also take a look at how that is impact.
How fluid do we expect changes to be? Is it on a daily basis, a weekly basis, on a 2-week basis?
It depends upon what occurs.
Okay.
If, for example, if we have a couple of students test positive within a particular classroom, MDH will be contacting us, we'll be having discussions. We will have to do something at the very least with that classroom right away. So once we get beyond the initial decision on how we're starting the year, we need to be very fluid after that. And it's a lot like what, if you think back about 10 years ago when we had the H1N1 flu go through. And there were a couple of cases up in the Rocori School District. Okay, the Department of Health came in, they talked to the superintendent, they told the superintendent what needed to be done. They closed for a day, they took care of some cleaning. They got the person or people that were ill out, they were back in session a day later. Now this obviously is different from that particular disease. I just use that as an example. But that's the type of fluidity we need to be able to have. We don't have necessarily the time to call school board meetings and make decisions on these as we go along. But we'll be getting guidelines and then we'll be keeping everyone informed and the public informed and responding accordingly.
My assumption will be that will be in a like safety plan.
Yes,
And is that something that the board is going to approve?
that's something the board will have a look at, yes, we'll approve. And as we go through, later on and during this, we will have the principals talking about what they're doing within each of theirs, and so we'll have all of this starting to be laid out. The total plans will be completed probably towards the end of next week. Everything will be in place. And then also, it does have to go to the Department of Education for their approval as well.
Right. You know, and that when that goes to the Department of Education.
That has to be done it has to be into them 2 weeks in advance of starting school, and then we have to have it all approved within that, a week before. It has to have been approved by them. And then post it on the website now to everyone.
The numbers that the governor came out with within, if the population reached so much, you go to distance learning and hybrid, all that, that's not set in stone. It's a guideline, correct? He kept referring, and I've had people ask me that's a guideline, what they're using with Minnesota Department of Health.
Right, that's what Minnesota Department of Health is using.
Right, so ultimately, if you wanted to be more stricter with that numbers, you could, or looser, that's not set in stone, right?
You have to appeal to make it looser though.
Yeah,
Right, I'm saying it's a guideline.
Right.
right.
It's not,
That's what people ask me.
it's not yet law.
Right, it's not set in stone, that's what people ask, that's one.
So in some sense, we have local control to implement more restrictive measures, but not more, open measures.
Right.
Right. You can't be looser.
But whichever way it goes, it has to be approved by the Department of Education, Department of Health.
And you talk about the Mineola case, so apparently when they're reporting by county, it's also by city or area in the county?
Well, they're reporting for that rubric, that comes by the county.
Okay, so
But they can also get it broken down into areas within the
Just,
county.
we have that option, because I would imagine the size of Yale Medicine, the amount that actually comes to our district is relatively small when you go all the way to the border of Yale Medicine County. When we have that same option.
Yeah, it depends on where it was.
Okay.
So for example, if the surge that put them over was in Canby,
Yep.
that's definitely not the impact on us.
Of Granite Falls, for example.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, yes, it can be appealed. So if we're not going to use the Department of Health's guidelines, we have to definitely have appealed 24 hours prior to us intending to implement and have gotten approval from them.
I think probably one of the most important takeaways is if parents and our community wants kids back in the classroom and staying there, we need to commit to keeping sick kids home, wearing masks, encouraging our kids to wear masks, hand washing, social distancing. Otherwise, we can't do it. And I think that's a really good takeaway from, everything that we've lived with for the last 5 months.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's got a text there, people that say they can't understand you, they have no idea what you're asking about, that, you want to.
I'll just take it off.
When you're
Yeah,
talking.
yeah, I'll take it off. I just said, and I'll repeat it because I think it's a good message to the community that if our community and our parents want kids, back in the classroom and stay there, the really important message or takeaway is that we need to commit to keeping sick kids home, because I think that that's an issue we face every year is that parents are sending sick kids to school. The community and parents need to wear masks and they need to encourage their kids to do that. Community members need to stay home when they're sick. Don't go to work if you're sick. And then hand wash and social distance. Because otherwise, your kids are going to be home. It's just not going to work if people aren't committed to that. So.
One question I have, piggybacking on with that is, maybe the principals will address it, but we have the flu that goes through and strep that goes through every year. It's always on the holidays, right? So what is our stance gonna be when little Johnny in third period has 100.8 temp, doesn't really feel good? In the past, we've sent them home and said, you'll come back until your fever is gone or until you have them thrown up in 24 hours. Are we mandating COVID tests? Are we saying you gotta sit home for 14 days? So we don't know is it true, is it flu or is it COVID? How are we gonna mandate?
We'll be getting more clarification on that as we meet we've not yet met with the Department of Health.
Okay.
And that's coming up yet tomorrow. But they are starting to look at the 24 to 72 hours of temperature free with no symptoms of being able to come back. They're not necessarily mandating with every fever, every illness that you go through a 10 or 14 day quarantine.
But our Department of Health just had one kid at Prairie Lakes on quarantine for 7 days. So they dropped it from 14 to 7. It's always a changing number.
Okay.
So.
Other questions, comments, concerns?
My questions probably are more specific for individual principals,
Okay,
just their staff related questions and things like that. So I mean, I don't know. Can I ask them now, they can ask them later, or will we?
and each principal's going to be presenting their
Okay.
plan.
Yeah, so I'll just.
I may have a general staff related question. I just occurred to me that I didn't have listed. So the governor's order says that staff members who feel they or family members may be at risk or are concerned for their health, should have the option to stay at home when possible. How are we conveying that to staff, and what accommodations are we making for staff?
Okay, so what the governor's order says is that if we're coming back in person, that people who have an underlying condition or an underlying condition within their household, we would make accommodations for, that they could be, we would look at them being able to work from home.
And we're making sure that they're aware of that as they're going back.
Now, we've got, so that having been said, we've got some staff members that are reporting underlying conditions within the family, and we're seeking, they do have to provide documentation for that. We don't need to know what it is, but there has to be something from medical doctors saying that, yeah, they need to be at home, which is what we did last spring. We also have people that are saying, I just don't feel comfortable coming into work. Well, the governor's executive order is very clear that if you don't have the underlying medical condition, that just not being comfortable isn't enough, that you need to report for work. Otherwise, it reverts back to your contract, your various sick leaves and so forth, the provisions of your collective bargaining agreement.
Do you anticipate us needing to shuffle some teachers around if there's someone with an underlying condition, but in a classroom that simply needs an in-person teacher to teach something else that they're licensed for, or I suppose that's just a...
It hasn't come up yet, but it is a possibility. Another thing that we're looking at is that, for example, let's say a particular grade level, you've got 4 sections of students, and let's say that we've got a teacher that is working from home, that they're teaching at that grade level. And we've got, we'll just say for discussion, we've got 20 kids in that grade level that have all opted to stay with distance learning. Now, we do have the option that we may have the ones that can come into school all be taught by the 3 teachers that are in school, and the other teacher would be teaching the students that are distance learning. So that would be just an example of how that might work. We don't necessarily have something like that arranged at this point or worked out at this point, but that's something that could be done, that the people who are working remotely might also be working with the kids who are working remotely.
Thank you.
Would an underlying condition be if the teacher themselves are healthy and they're student kids, they have kids at home, but they want to see their parents who live on the other side of town, but they're elderly, so they're considered high risk? Can a teacher say, I don't want to work because I want to be able to see does that fall underneath that?
I would say probably no.
Okay.
It has to be in the household.
Literally in the household. itself.
Right.
So I want to see mom and dad.
Right, I mean, you try to keep it to where it's within the core family unit, to try to avoid situations where, people it can be stretched out.
Right. So,
And very,
how far?
yeah.
So this question might kind of segue to a elementary question, but like, how do you social distance when they all come back and there's 25 kids in a room? It's almost mathematically impossible. How do you do that?
If they can all be, if your numbers are such that they can all be back in school in person, then within the instructional setting, they don't have to be social distance. You need to try to keep as much distance as you can, but you don't have to adhere to the 6 feet between people right here
In the classroom.
in the classroom. If in any common areas, you do need to maintain the 6 feet of social distance.
How does our bathrooms accommodate that?
Our bathrooms,
Mm-hmm.
to limit people, the number of people going in at a time.
If you go one, it's like within like one classroom goes at a time, those, let's just throw out a number, 10 or 12 girls can go in at once because they're already together in the classroom, or 3, 3, 3. I think there's 3 stalls is why I say that.
I would say they would probably move in as it made it available. That would be better answered by the building principal, but yeah.
Logistically, that could be a bit of a nightmare, but I'm sure they'll,
I mean, I think it's
creative
similar to,
teachers, they'll figure it
I don't
out.
know which district said that to accommodate social distancing, they needed buildings the size of 6 or 7 pentagons. You know, and I think that that's a similar thing that, I mean, I don't know how you can move through, 175 girls in your couple bathrooms in your elementary school in a day. It's tough. Stood in some pretty long ladies' room lines.
Again, I think that'd be an excellent question when the principals present theirs.
Right.
It would be understandable though, if they're together as a cohort, or like a classroom, that, whether they're together there or they're together in the restroom, it would be,
Right.
same people, right? Same germs.
And this could be asked to all principals, but maybe it's, you guys as administrators have met. Are we changing, no matter if we go distance learning or kids opt to distance learn, are we going to change the format compared to what we did in the spring, where you get your assignments and you're done by 10 o'clock? Or are we going to say, you are going to be reporting to period 1 on the screen?
Each of the principals is addressing how they're going to do distance learning.
And then I think my last question was based on Minnesota Department of Minnesota State High School League. Any kid who opts to distance learn is then not eligible to play any sports or do any extracurricular activities. Is that correct?
I didn't hear that.
I've not heard that. I
Awesome.
say Mr. Gray can address that though when he,
Or in, as a district?
Well, they made the decision today,
yeah.
that they're moving football and volleyball to the springs.
Right,
So,
but as a district, I thought if we went all distance learning, then your kids would not be eligible for any extracurricular activities.
That would-
Or a kid chose, and says, I don't feel safe, I want to be at home, then
Well-
they're not allowed to do extracurricular activities.
Well, if,
That would make sense.
I mean, I don't know why, I don't know how you would feel, safer playing football than you would attending a math class.
Right.
I'm with you.
I get it, but I just want to be sure that, we
Yeah.
understand that too, so. I'll ask Mr. Gray.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Okay, so taking a look at the items, I think, we've gotten down through most of it, through the conference call that I have tomorrow with public health and getting updates at that time on the MDH requirements. So, if there's anything else on the items above that? If not, I'll go ahead and move on to, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of my phone conversation this morning. We had a call with all of the superintendents from the Marquette schools. And I think this is germane because it really applies to schools that are throughout our general area. And it illustrates a little bit of the difference between our district and the other districts based on the size of our community and our school district. So that does make some difference in there. We talked primarily on that call relative to the hybrid models. Within all of the schools, except Montevideo, if they're using their hybrid model, they'll be able to get everyone into their building. They'll have to still social distance if they're on the hybrid model. But the other districts have enough space in their buildings. Their enrollment has gone down enough from when they were at full capacity in their buildings that they can get the number of people within the classroom, which would be 50% occupancy of the classroom, and it's based on the fire marshals, the fire code. They get 50% in there, and then what's left can be in other remote areas throughout the building. And they can teach a hybrid model with 100% of their students in the building.
Interesting.
Montevideo can't do that because we don't have the space available. It's most noticeable at the high school. We've got a lot of classrooms that are exceptionally small, and we've got some class sizes that are larger. And so we've got some classrooms that rather than being 900 square feet or 750 square feet, we've still got 30 kids in that room. And we don't have a place to move all of those other kids within the building where they can still just remote in from inside the building into a classroom setting. So because of that, Mr. Hickey developed a different plan for how our hybrid would work. But that's just a difference in how it's being addressed in other schools and in ours. There's a difference in there because of the enrollment, the building facilities themselves, the population of our community. And on the other hand, there are a lot of advantages to being a larger school in the area. We've got a lot of pluses. We have a lot of offerings that others don't have. So there's also a lot of pros to it, but it makes this just a little more challenging. Screening, the Department of Health has backed off on the requirements for screening as people get onto buses and come into buildings, and they're pushing more for relying upon parents to screen kids at home and keep them at home when they're sick. And we will have to provide materials to parents on what things to look for, what symptoms should they be looking for if those are coming up. We'll do some screening once they get here and into the classrooms. And what we'll be doing is what teachers do with all illnesses. They watch for kids that just don't look to be themselves and react accordingly. And then they'll take the temperatures. And in some cases, we may take temperatures regularly within the classroom. But the screening was something that was really going to create some difficulties if we were trying to do temperature checks of every student as they got on the bus, as they came into the building, and it was going to be intensified when we got into winter, because then you have the ambient temperature that's impacting what the readings are. And so that's a little bit about how we're going to address that. All of the schools within the Mervyn districts are looking at doing that same thing relative to screening. Rely upon the parents to do that checking and keeping the kids home if they're ill. Another problem that arises if we're doing the screening right as they get onto buses are the people that drop the kids off at bus stops and then they take off. You detect a temperature there. Here you are out at a bus stop. the bus driver finds the kid has a temperature, or an aide on the bus says they have a temperature, but there's nobody at home. And so, if we're at school, and we find that, then we can deal with that, we can better handle that.
And I understand not, on the bus, it's logistically problematic, but I think that relying on parents to screen students is probably not, and there are a lot of great parents out there, but we can't rely on parents to put their kids to bed at night. We can't rely on parents to make sure their kids' homework's done. We can't rely on parents always to make sure their kids make it to school on time. But we're gonna rely on parents to make sure that their kids are health screened, especially when they've got every financial interest in making sure their kids' butts are sitting in the school that day because they don't have to take off work. And I think that that is probably not the most prudent course of action. I think that in the school setting, we need to do some pretty decent screening. And like I said, I'm not saying all parents are not doing what they need to be doing, but there are, we've got issues with that. All districts do, all communities do.
And there are variations of how we could do that as well. We could very easily go through the questions, for example, with them, and then still wait on temperature screening until we see how they are responding. So that would be a possibility on it.
The temperature is, we're finding that temperatures are actually not as reliable as a symptom for this particular virus as we once thought. You could miss an infected individual simply looking at it.
You're right with that.
So we just have to be observant and work together as a community, as you alluded to earlier.
I think everybody's got to step up.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that if it's going to work, it's going to take everybody working to make it. So, and it's one of those things, it's only as strong as the weakest link.
And I think that, and I don't think we can express that enough to people, that they'll be home. I look at Lauren's first grade classroom, when there was, right before Christmas, there was enough students out with stomach flu to shut our buildings down now with the COVID numbers. And that was, all fall was a story with strep throat and things like that. So, it's going to be very easy for kids to become the transmitters if we're not, and our partners in the community and parent partners aren't very, very diligent in this.
It's none of it's any fun, just do what we can do. Follow the rules as close as we can and act.
And students are still going to get the flu, they're still going to get strep throat, they're still going to get all of the other illnesses that we see every year. They'll still be there.
They might not get strep throat this week, everybody's wearing masks.
That's
That's
possible.
the best of it.
It's interesting how many times
It's probably not gonna stop it though.
Well,
So,
maybe.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
So it's hard to chew on your pencil when you got a mask over your face.
you get strep throat a lot of different ways than through your mouth,
Also, face masks, face shields are required. And if the person comes, they're not going to be allowed in without them.
Yeah.
And I understand that there are people that don't like face masks, they don't like shields, but pick a rule in the student handbook.
Yeah.
You can probably find somebody that doesn't like pretty much each rule that's in there.
Right.
Let's get real, nobody likes wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Nobody likes wearing a
I
mask.
mean,
I don't, and I wear one at work. None of us do.
Yep.
And, you know,
Will students have options between face masks or shields depending on their, physical impairment or?
yes, if there is, so there are exceptions based upon medical needs.
Right.
And some individuals can't wear a mask, they could wear a face shield. Also, a face shield is acceptable by any student at the elementary level in an instructional setting.
So up to third grade in our school?
So that would be sixth grade.
Sixth grade in our school.
oh,
You're going by the state.
Yeah,
But
by the
they're-
states, by how the state defines elementary and secondary.
but they're not acceptable for high schools.
They're not, not as readily. In fact, Lakeview got denied on theirs initially when they showed theirs to the state on using strictly shields at the high school level.
So there has to be a medical reason then in the high school.
Or a deaf and hard of hearing issue or something.
Right.
So those
Or
students,
special ed, or-
yeah, I mean, any of those students with BP that would drive it. Okay.
And as a general rule, face shields are acceptable though in an instructional setting. They're not acceptable out in the more congregate areas. You're going down the hall, you need the mask in those areas. Additionally, MSBA is developing a face mask policy that they'll be pushing out to everyone. Originally, because it was part of an executive order, it wasn't felt that it needed to be there. However, when they started putting in the requirements for the plans, one of the requirements that MDE put in there was a face mask policy. And so we will be getting a proposed policy from MDE that we'll be able to take a look at, or from MSBA that we'll be able to take a look at and report it. Other questions or thoughts relative to the start of the school year?
How are we gonna communicate to students this mask and face shield thing, so they know when and where they can wear what? Do we have a creative way of helping kids understand that? Or is it just, I mean, maybe it's not necessary, maybe it's just, you're at the high school, you have to have a cloth mask at all times. And if you're at the elementary, you can do this or this, is that, if I'm understanding it right?
In the instructional setting, and you can't do it exclusively at the high school in the instructional setting for the face shield. But for some instructional purposes, you can go to a face shield on a non-permanent basis. I think that's going to need to be conveyed at each building level as to what the expectations are and
You know, I'm thinking like normally at the beginning of the school year, you'd have a school assembly where you could talk about all these things, but we are certainly, I'm guessing, not gonna be able to have an all-school assembly.
no,
So I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking some cute little creative videos would certainly help.
and we do have, the principals are working on some things they're going to be doing with conferencing with individual families and students.
Okay.
And so a lot of information can be conveyed during those times.
Can we, or should we have just a regular recurring PR message about wear your face coverings every day when you come to school, have your face coverings? I mean, if you're out there reminding people, they're seeing it everywhere else, right? You walk into the bank, it's there, you walk into restaurants, it's there. So I mean, if we're doing our part of reminding, then we're not missing the boat, right? I mean,
If we can do the same type of signage, for example, you see it, you go into a lot of businesses
just
on our
simple
doors.
stuff, you know, age appropriate, you know, maybe a little more fun for the younger kids. I saw one from northern Minnesota, Cook County, they did stay a moose apart. Kind of fun, right? Can be somewhat entertaining, we don't have to make this a drab, dreary.
Who's bearing the cost of the shields when students need them for educational needs and also for medical needs that may or may not be part of an IEP plan?
Well, we're providing, and we've already purchased, we're providing face masks for all students. Also, we will be getting face masks and shields from the state, and that's being borne by the state. If a piece of equipment is going to be used at school, then the district will bear the cost of that as part of the IEP, just like we do for any other accommodation that's there. And so I guess that's, I don't know if that answers your question.
So if Johnny has asthma or anxiety or whatever, and it's not part of an IEP plan, but doctor says, or they should say, Johnny should wear a shield, is that Johnny's family's responsibility to bear that cost, or is the district going to be providing that shield?
The district would probably provide that. We would have that shield remain
Here at the
On
school.
site.
here.
Yeah.
Good questions.
I don't think I have any more general questions. Some of them are specific.
Okay, you ready to listen to the plans that the principals have? All right. And because they've requested a change in the order or adjusting routine, we'll begin with Mr. Hickey.
Oh, here you go.
Hi. Where you guys want me, at the podium over there?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the record, not all principals requested this change. I happen to be outvoted, which is unfortunate for me.
You don't have any seniority. Probably got your.
Apparently. So, shall I don't know how well people can hear me or not. Okay, so this is very similar. Our plans are very similar to what you guys heard earlier this year. I'll give a brief overview. I imagine you're gonna have a lot of questions, so I'll try and reserve time. Essentially, the way that we're gonna set up is that all three of our plans, whether we're in hybrid, distance learning, or back regular, we wanna format it and utilize Google Classroom and digital means as much as we can, so that way there's not as big a shift. We may have to change location when people come into school, but the educational mode hopefully will stay, and how things are delivered will stay the same. We also need to do that with our students that are at home. Just so you're aware, the idea of students being at home and students being at school is something that the teachers are very concerned about. Because the idea of lesson planning and having two separate lesson plans really isn't feasible. There's accommodations you can make and there's some things you can do, and we most certainly will do that. But depending on the mode of education that we're currently in, out of the three scenarios, makes it more feasible. So that part will change a little bit. I'll start with distance learning. Distance learning will look very similar to what we did in the spring. However, we will try to build in some pieces that we were missing, that parents said we were missing a lot. I know that students, staff, parents have said they wanted more teacher-student interaction. Now, obviously, in distance learning, that's a little difficult to do. But we most likely would pick a day of the week. Monday is what we're looking at right now, will be more synchronous learning. And that means, for people listening at home or anything else, it means whatever, that people are all online at the same time. High school plans do not call for a lot of synchronous learning, but that's something we want to do one day where they can see their teacher, they can see their classmates. We know we've had some issues, and we know that Google Hangouts, for example, is going to change how they either charge or the amount of people you can have in. But Mr. Ripley was able to negotiate with GoGuardian, our security software. So we're looking at how we can utilize that so there might be a systems change with that. So the distance learning would look very much the same. Students would be at home. We'd be pushing everything out electronically, but we try to do some more things to have more teacher-student interaction. Hybrid would be very similar to distance learning in terms of how the content was pushed out, but we also then be able to bring students into the building. Like as was discussed earlier in the meeting that I was listening to, we have some issues in terms of number of staff, class sizes, and sizes of classrooms. Some school districts could go 50-50 in their classrooms. We can't go 50-50. Just like some other schools in our district, the elementary in the middle and in Sanford can go 50-50, we cannot. Space is an issue. Class sizes are an issue. So what we would do during hybrid learning is that we would take the groups that we have, which would work with the family groups we have 50-50, because the last thing we want is for the older kids in the family not to be home when the younger kids are home, because a lot of our families rely on their older children for childcare. So it would work on that, but we would basically be rotating our kids in 4 different groups. So we'd be going 25% roughly, give or take, rotating in Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday would be a digital learning day for everybody. But we also would like to be able to have kids that need more support, be able to have our teachers have office hours during that time period. So whether we have kids that are not participating in hybrid and they happen to be doing distance learning, if they really need to come in, they could make office hours with their individual teacher one-on-one. We could do that with any student that would like to do that. The other advantage and the reason we did this is if you look at our students and how they performed their distance learning last year, is that about 60% of the kids did really well. Doesn't mean they all got A's or B's, but they did school well. We didn't see a major drop off in what they did. About 20% of the remaining 40%, about half of those students, they struggled, but we were able to get them where they needed to go. We had another 20% that we called disengaged students that we really struggled with. They were disengaged. We weren't able to get them in. The advantage with our plan is by bringing 25% of the kids in and knowing that hybrid we can have up to 50%, is that we can say some kids based upon what they need, could be ESL, could be special ed, or our kids that are disengaged, or kids that don't have internet access, we can bring them in every day. We have school success coordinators. We will not be doing, in any scenario, we're not doing lunch the way we did. It's contactless lunch. It's one of the things they're recommending what we're doing. So we have the cafeteria available. We can spread kids out. We have school success coordinators, paraprofessionals, teachers that are on duty, prep, things that we can use to really work with those kids that need individualistic attention. Or a kick in the rear. We can provide that too. So that's what we're looking at in hybrid. Educationally, a lot of the content will be pushed out through Google Classroom and online, very similar to distance learning. But like I said, the advantage is we can bring the kids in. And what we want to do is have that 25% when they're in, they get to have one-on-one interaction with their teachers. Right. We want them to have interaction with their teachers. All kids. I mean, some kids may choose not to come in, and that's totally fine. We may get to a point where some kids feel they may not need to come in that week. And we're trying to further all the initiatives we do. Those of you that went on the Farmington visit or look at innovation, we talk about flexing kids out, kids that are able to handle their business, right? If we have kids that can handle their business and don't need to come in, we most certainly can accommodate that. But we also don't want to just focus and say, well, Johnny's struggling, so he gets to come in all the time, but Tommy, you don't get to see your teacher. That's not fair either. So we're trying to balance that, and we don't want to take a one-size-fits-all approach. We want to be able to adjust to what the individual students need. So, in person would look very similar to normal because that's what we have available. We do know that the guidelines are changed. The 6 feet distancing is relaxed, and that is not necessary under the guidelines for having all of the kids back. Just as I said before, just as we can't go 50% with having 6 feet spacing, we can average about 13 kids per room. Our rooms are about 26 by 26.
So if I understand right, we can go all kids to school, social distancing doesn't apply in the classroom, but if we go hybrid, they have to social distance?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not telling you the logic.
No, I know, I just,
Yeah.
I know.
I know, it's.
Make sure we're hearing it, right? Because it sounds weird.
Right, it most certainly does. We have everything that we talk about in the outside world and everything that we're trying to do. But if you're back in school, those don't apply.
Full-time.
Full-time.
It's hybrid.
Full-time, absolutely, yeah. So full-time would look very similar. Now, one thing that you'll hear from the other principals at the middle school and elementary levels that they can do that we're not able to do is they can move some of the kids into pods. And they can move them around and they can reduce the contact with kids because if you're in 3rd grade, you have your class. Mr. Huntley down even in like 6th and 7th grade, they don't have the electives that we do. So for example, you can have the same kids move from math to English and so forth. Electives drive our schedule. We're not able to do that. If we were a school the size of Hancock where the kids stay together, there's one class all the way through, you can do that. But given our size and the positive things that being a big school, the electives that we have, we're not able to do that. I do know that, for example, like passing time, that's a high school problem that all high schools have. I met last night with all the area local principals, and there's not a lot that we can do about that. I asked people, we all talk to each other, what if we stagger different times? We're still gonna have kids lined up outside because this teacher might have 8th grade English this hour, they might have 10th grade English the next hour. And that's what we have with the school size that we have. So regular would look very similar. There are things that I'll be working with Countryside Public Health for recommendations as far as like choir, band. Can we utilize the gym? Can we get our FIAD classes outside? Are we able to, for example, if they're back and we do lunches, stagger them by classrooms, and when the weather's nice, get them outside and have a chance they can take their mask off for a little while. Basically give kids a little bit of a recess, So, I mean, there's some things that we're looking at doing, how to provide some relief. But if we're back regular, it will look very similar to what we've done because there's not a whole lot of things we can do. And I think that's why you see in the state plans, there's a difference when high school goes to hybrid and the relaxing of the schedules because in the other restrictions, because especially at the high school, there's only so much. So that's just a brief overview. There will be much more detailed plans for all 3 of them, regardless of how we open, that will be available on the website and go on to parents, and we'll break some of that specifics down. But I guess I'll open up to you guys for questions. I know that I heard that you said you have questions for specific principals. I don't know if it's me or not, or anybody else.
So I've got a couple.
Sure.
Somebody else wants to shoot. So in person, lunch is going to look like lunch in the lunchroom, or
No.
in
We're
person, they're still going to be bringing lunch to the classroom.
bringing lunch to the classroom. They're still contactless. And to be honest, like I said, I know that you brought up, like, we're not doing assemblies. I mean, we just can't. It's irresponsible to do so. So same thing with lunch. I mean, even though we have 3 lunches, you break our kids in thirds. You're still talking 175 kids, something like that. That's not good. And plus, if you space them out 6 feet, I actually tried to go way down the hallway and bend around. It's not good.
My questions get progressively harder.
I wasn't aware there was going to be a test.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
So there won't be cleaning and disinfecting in the classrooms and the work surfaces between classes.
What we're looking at right now is we're going to have to utilize the, hate to say the manpower we have, manpower we have is also include students being responsible for some of that as well. So we're looking at whatever, it doesn't matter the model, we have kids in the building, we'll have a cleaning solution, whatever it's based, you know, whether it's the instructor, kids squirt down their area, wipe it off, that's what we're gonna have to do. We will have our staff come through and our custodial staff will disinfect bathrooms as much as we can and other services. But we will have a standard procedure that's done at the end of every class period, even if we have to end every class period, you know, 3 to 4 minutes early.
I think that's good. I said that for a long time, that students should take responsibility of their space and keeping it clean. I've always thought that that was a good idea. The other question is regarding your 60-20-20. You had 60% of students who did really well, 20% that you were able to deal with, and 20% that were disengaged. How do those affect? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
How do those numbers differ from a typical in-person year?
What we look at, and I mean, RTI model is something we throw around, you know, not get into that, but we look at core instruction. Core instruction works for 80% of your kids. And then 20% require reteaching, you know, like some sort of intervention with that. So in a typical year, what we shoot for, is fairly standard, is like an 80-20. So you could say that we're obviously a little below that. It depends how you look at it. So I would say obviously we did have more failures than we have had in the past. We have had more kids disengaged. Well, it's really hard to disengage when kids come into class and you have effective teachers like we do, and they say, why did you do your homework? Or we have a school success coordinator like we do, or two that come in there and get on, and then we have teacher, you know, contacting parents. The problem we have with a lot of those teachers, and you know, not trying to be disrespectful in any way, shape, or form, is we also didn't get a lot of support from parents as well. So it's like they were on an island somewhere, and we would call, no change, nothing. We'd go make house calls.
This spring, you felt like you had less support from parents than.
No, I wouldn't say that. It's when we have the kids in the classroom, we're able to have an impact on them regardless of parent support, generally.
So you didn't.
But during distance learning, we're entirely dependent on parents being involved. And sometimes it's not the fact that they don't want to. It's if you're working long hours and you're doing certain things, you may not be able to. And plus, kids are a pain in the butt sometimes, let's be real. You might tell Tommy, if you're working, your homework better be done by the time I get home.
And you don't know until 2 days later when you get the email saying, you didn't do your work.
Yes.
And you know, so in all honesty, no matter how smart parents and we think we are, and even how educated we are,
Well, you do.
no, the high school math, you know, I mean, I can't help like kids with math past 5th grade. I mean, some of these things that the kids are learning, you know, anatomy and physiology. And so, you know, if we can maybe help a little bit with parents, those kind of supports.
Absolutely.
In resources, because, you know, I think that that's hard to find, especially, you know.
It is, and I don't mean to, you know, downplay the role of parents, but that's also why we have highly skilled and licensed educators.
Right.
They know their stuff. They're good. We want them to do their jobs with our kids. Now, obviously, you know, we have the situation that we're in, and parents do the best that they can do, but we all know that no matter what, the best place for a kid is in a classroom in front of a highly skilled educator. You know, so absence of that, how do we make accommodations to support that in any way that we can?
So to piggyback off that, one of my questions is distance learning. You said you're gonna have one day where interactive potentially. Why can't I do that 5 days a week?
The problem becomes, there's a few problems with that. There are some schools that are entirely reliant on that. The problem that, there's a couple logistical problems. Number one, a lot of high school students and upper middle school students are responsible for childcare in their homes and helping their younger children do some of those things.
Sure.
There are some high school staff that really would like to do that. But looking at how the whole picture comes together, that's not something that we really can do because, you know, sometimes there are certain things that are, especially when the kids are at home, that our kids are expected to do above and beyond just their schoolwork. We want to look at how to do some more of that. But then the other piece is we are trying to teach responsibility as well. The thing is, especially with hybrid, the reason we don't want to do synchronous is that we don't want the teacher, I don't want to say waste, it's not the right word, but when the teacher's in a classroom, all teachers, my career, everybody would love to have a small class of kids to work with, right? Get hands-on with as many kids as you can. If we're in a hybrid setting with 25% of your kids in the classroom, you now have the opportunity to do that. If you're trying to teach to those kids with the limitations of the kids that are at home, you're not able to do that. You're not able to have that one-on-one that we could provide them that we normally wouldn't be able to do that. If we're full distance learning, I do know that neighboring school districts did do that in the spring and tried that. They had many problems with attendance as well.
I can imagine asking a student to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours
Yes.
is going to be problematic.
So, yeah, I just think that distance learning we did, and no disrespect to administration, because you guys are throwing on a big ball and about 2 weeks figured out. It's a joke. It's a joke. Kids didn't learn. I mean, we talk to educators, and they feel like they're set so far back. And you have kids that are gonna enroll full-time because they just wanna be lazy, and they don't wanna get up and do it, and they would rather just sit at home and get the packet pushed to them, and they can knock it out in 2 hours, or wait till 8 o'clock at night to do it. Are we gonna be teaching to the standardized testing we're doing now, or are we gonna be changing this, and this might be more MDE coming out? How are we gonna be doing testing and funding all that, right? Because they're not getting that one-on-one time with that highly educated specialized teacher you're talking about.
Yep.
And if we're gonna hold them accountable, why can't they be accountable in front of that screen? And then when the bell rings, that's their time to go to the bathroom or get whatever. And I guess some families are gonna rely on for daycare, I get that. So you take 20%, we'll put those kids aside. But
You'd be amazed how many. Right, I went through our district, we split the district in half, and I went through the vast majority of kids, like, I looked at it, how can I move kids if I need to? Right. To try and balance things, the vast majority of kids in our district have kids in the lower buildings.
So last time we talked about this, there was a lot more talk about synchronous, so has it shifted?
No, never for me, no. For them, yes. There's a lot of things, if you look at the portrait of a graduate, like, part of the things we're trying to teach our kids is to be self-directed learners. We're looking at personalized learning. We're looking at innovation in terms of like the Farmington Hub. We're not trying to bring anything in, especially at the high school, that we haven't done before. We're trying to look at how can we adapt the initiatives and everything we've been working on, our teachers have been working on so hard to fit this situation. So if you look at things, 60% of our kids, over half, were able to handle it really, really well. We've had teachers that have tried some things and have seen great successes. Now, granted, we have some kids that are struggling as well, and that's what we have to look at. How can we balance that a little bit? How can we take some of the things that we lost or we didn't have, are we able to add that? And that's the advantage of looking at hybrid situation we're trying to capitalize on.
From an attendance standpoint, I mean, it's two different standards, right? You come into school, you better be in there before the bell rings and you time your party and you got a mask and all this, and your home is just so much more flexible and you do whatever they want, right? I mean, I guess I just look at it as that I see both sides. I just, with the technology we have and everything else, it would just be nicer to see more 2 or 3 days a week of synchronized. I think just to hold kids accountable.
What about just recorded, so it's at least it's still available? I mean, how much of that?
We can do that.
I
We
guess,
didn't do a lot of that. We're looking at how we can do that. We do some mandatory, I hate to say mandatory, but we do have tech training that everybody in the district is going to be doing. We're looking at how we can do that. Because you're right, there are some things, even if a teacher says, and I'm working with my team on that, and a lot of teachers are pushing for that. I said, you also gotta remember, there's some other things at play here, right? Because everybody looks at it through their own lens, right? So I try and look at it through a district lens of saying that we have other kids and knowing that other principals, you can ask them, a lot of their kids are very dependent on their older siblings being able to help them out throughout the day. That's how they make it go. And I'm not that we need to sacrifice, but we also talk to them saying if we do more synchronous activities, that they have to be understanding about that with their kids as well. We do also have some kids that if we do synchronous activities, we shouldn't be able to penalize them either. So if they're not able to log on at that time, you know, they need to be able, if they're taking care of what they need to be taken care of, you know, it doesn't matter when it gets done. So you're right, it's a balance. I mean, we could go one way, the other way, and we lose everything else. So it's trying to find that happy medium. But I do think that doing synchronous, I mean, we do have some kids that took distance learning and really ran with it and did really, really well. You know, we want those kids to do well. And that's like, if you look at the portrait of a graduate, all those things, everything we're looking at with innovation is looking at, you know, is it based upon seat time? Sometimes it is. There are some things you need to do that are based upon seat time. But we're trying to build that responsibility within kids as much as we can, that self-direction, that self-directed learning.
My final question I can ask everybody is, if the numbers didn't dictate, what are you in favor of?
I would say this. We all prefer to have our kids back. There is no question about that. Given taking safety, taking everything out, we all want our kids back. That's not a question. I do also look at, I want to keep everybody as safe as possible. There's no one ringing that bell if somebody gets sick or, God forbid, worse. So I think it's looking at the situation. I do think it would be beneficial to have kids back in some capacity to start the school year, because part of the reason during distance learning, we were able to push our kids, we had those established relationships. That's important.
And rapport.
It is.
Yep.
It is. I also know that taking into account, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a doctor. I have to take a look at the state's telling us certain things. Doesn't mean we can't work within that a little bit and understand that. So same thing with the graduation guidelines. Like, they said this, that's what we do. I know they're giving us a little more, I wouldn't say freedom because we know it's not freedom. But me, I mean, like I said, I would love to have everybody back. Given the situation and also looking at, for example, that we're not able to socially distance, you know, we got us taking out the locker room bathrooms and things like that. We got 2 bathrooms for each size. You know, we do have some issues there that do concern me. We do have kids shifting throughout the building. And if something were to happen, it would spread to the high school like wildfire. I mean, let's just be real. Yeah. You know, so I would say, if you were asking for me, given, you know, free reign to say what I think that probably the best thing would be hybrid. Now, obviously, you know, like I said, if the state says we can go full, and we go full, and we decide to go full, we'll go full. You know, we'll do what we need to do. But that's, if you're asking my opinion, that's my opinion.
Who's your staff? Tell me.
Staff are mixed. I have had, and I haven't surveyed them recently, but at the end of the school year, everybody wanted to come back, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to have kids back.
Yep.
But now the other part is the reality. Like, what's the work situation? It is also taking into account your personal and your family health, you know, let alone students' health. So there's a little bit there right now. I know that there's apprehension, I will say that. Looking at the data that we have so far, some staff want to be back. Some staff don't want to be back. They're apprehensive for reasons. And there are some that feel that, you know, hybrid, you know, so it's kind of all over the board. It depends who you ask. There's not a unified voice saying that we want to do this. Everybody has their different concerns and their different thoughts.
I've gathered similar feedback. It's mixed. I took a very unscientific poll in the people that answered the phone when I called. and I talked
Do you use science?
No, just they answered. So I mean, I talked to 4 or 5 people, and I think 4 of the 5 were mixed, and 1 was let's go.
Yeah.
And so I mean, that's maybe representative of the population. Maybe it's a little skewed higher, but again, it wasn't my sample wasn't scientific at all.
You know, I'm sure it all depends where you're coming from, right?
Yeah.
I talked to a family friend, who are really close with their kids, You know, they feel that their young elementary kids need to be back in school. They felt the absence of them not being in school and fear of what that would be like. But that's also a concern, maybe taken outside the science of the disease itself. You know, so there's a couple ways of looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had almost unilateral response from parents of children of elementary age. Pick whatever range of elementary you want to pick, ours or the state. Most of them want the younger kids to go back to school too.
Well, in here.
Well, it's just,
And
if they want them in the classroom to learn and they, you know, like, some of them didn't get what they needed, like Joe cited, right? And some of them, yeah, they had all these other socioeconomic challenges that they gotta deal with.
I have two more questions that I wrote down. One's really quick for, I think Dr. Keller would be a better person to answer. What percent of our students have internet access, reliable internet access?
During the spring, we got us to where we had close to 100% had internet access.
And we're making accommodations for those students that don't have?
We are, right now we're gathering the data.
Okay.
Because a lot of the things that were in place in the spring went away with the end of the school year. The things like the charter was provided.
We got a lot of help from providers.
Yeah, and so that's where we're moving back to looking at what we can do to accommodate.
So Joe's question brought up some questions for you, Scott, that I didn't realize. My kids are pretty independent learners, and so basically I'd say, get your work done, and they get, you know, I didn't have a clue what they were doing during the day. So what's a hybrid day look like for students? What does it look like
Well, it depends,
typically?
what we're looking at is we're gonna try and structure it much like a college week in the sense of, we can't wait for the kids that come into school Monday and get their in-person lesson, whatever that is, for the kids on Thursday to get that same lesson. You can't do that. So you're gonna kind of have to push out your content separately with what's gonna happen when you come in. So for example, like in a college setting, you might have a lecture on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you might have your discussion and or lab on, it could be any day of the week, but it all flows together. So we need to do some of the same things. So teachers could do assessment during that time period when they're in school. It could be a flipped classroom where they're doing the content and they're checking in with their kids as they come in. It could be that they're doing an in-person lesson that they might need to do. It could be a science or lab activity. So the daily, what we're looking at is pushing out the work on Monday for the entire week. So kids that can be high flyers and do what they're gonna do, they can do what they're gonna do. When they rotate in, they can rotate in. The other kids, there will be, you know, here's not your stuff, here's go. It's like, here we need to do Monday, here's what you do Tuesday, here's what you do Wednesday, you know, and so forth. Like, here's how that goes. And then hopefully, you know, the teacher will be checking in with them when they rotate in, either from that week or from the previous week.
How is the content being pushed out though to the students that are home?
As far as,
What format is it?
if we were hybrid, they would, kids at home would be getting the same thing, everybody.
Is it videos? Is it
A little bit of everything.
worksheets? Is it readings? What does it look like?
We're looking at how, we've had some departments really look at, especially math, they've been looking at flipped classroom before, which for people that are listening, flipped classroom means outside of school, they're like watching a video, they're watching the teacher teach, and then when they come into school with that teacher support, they're getting one-on-one support. The teacher can see what they're doing. So that's kind of like one of the main things that we're looking at we'd be able to do. So, for example, the math department, I know Mr. Shinning, for example, I didn't know all the other teachers did, not to pick on anybody else or not pick on anybody. He would record his lesson and post it online. He posted online for the kids to watch what they did, and then they would have work that would be in there. So they'd be getting kind of a digital lesson. They'd be then checking in with the teacher during distance learning, you know, whether it's via email with questions, or maybe doing some sort of assessment or work where the teacher can then get back with the students. So it's a variety.
I brought this up in July too, and I don't know what progress has been made, but have you guys been able to make progress in standardizing the platform so that, I'm oversimplifying, all the teachers are using Google Classroom and not saying, go here to get this, go there to get that, go there to go that. I can't keep it all straight to help them. So I'm just wondering, what progress have you made to narrow the tools?
The main focus for all the classes is Google Classroom. That's the main one. Now, there are some other, depending, because Google Classroom doesn't do everything, they are releasing new tools in anticipation of this. But there are some things like Agriculture does something new. Like there's different programs, so there are some things that they would have. The main pushing out of everything, at least at the high school, I can't speak for the other grades, but I know we've been looking at standardizing that, is Google Classroom.
And they are working on getting all of the buildings going to the same basic platform.
Yeah, and again,
There was a separate platform at the elementary.
yeah, spring wasn't a good measure, because that was a
Yeah.
different,
Yeah,
goal,
that is-
right? So,
That's been a main area of concentration.
okay.
You guys have been asking questions, so I believe me.
Last quick question for you, is there any plan for the eighth graders that are coming in to get acquainted, whether you go hybrid, in person, whatever?
Right now, we have Tuesday of workshop week completely reserved for whatever it is we need to do. Depending on the model, if we do hybrid or distance, we would work it much like conferences, where people would have a time with their TA advisor, they'd come in, we would have something for individually for new kids to the building, do them at, obviously at a certain time, we can't have them in groups, make sure they got a tour of the building. They did certain things like that. If we go to all in, now that opens up our day because we don't have to disseminate materials. Because let's just say that we do hybrid, right? First week of school is we have Monday through Thursday. What we can't do is just say your first day of school is Thursday and you're not doing anything Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? So we need to get them their stuff. So we're kind of sitting on that Tuesday right now. It might be an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We're kind of waiting to see how it is we go and then adjust and put in place what we need to. We would like to have all 8th graders and new students come in, get some sort of a orientation.
Good, thanks.
Thanks,
Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Higgins.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you.
for all your hard work.
And Mr. Huntley will be our next one up.
So I got a text update, there's 84 people watching and there's 92 questions posted already, so thanks for participating. That's one of the best events we've had in a long time, so I'm glad people are joining.
Will the principals be sticking around in case some of the questions are directed to them?
We're not gonna address the questions now.
They're not going to be?
We're gonna look at them after, I'll be picking up Monday or something.
Yeah. It's not gonna become interactive at all.
That's.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
That's a lot of comments.
Yeah.
Can you send them all and answer them
Yes.
by email?
Yes.
Yes. We don't have to have 7 different answers.
Oh, it's just.
For every question.
I was gonna say half and half, but that's like that most. You can skip that.
I didn't get that. Okay, Joanne, Travis. I should give you mine than I do without mentioning the it's further of the offering, so.
Okay, just wanted to kind of share again, kind of where we're at with the planning process for the middle school. I did see on the comments from the YouTube link, one question was, where's the separation between elementary and secondary? So I just wanted to reiterate, for elementary, it's K-6, secondary would be 7-12. So we would follow the state statute for that, for those recommendations. So I just wanted to clear that part up. Also, Kelly, you had asked about masks and expectations in kids and all that, and I think Dr. Heller answered that question as far as like, during our conferences that we have with kids, we'll share those expectations. So, and that's also laid out in this plan as well. So what this is it's a document that addresses each of the scenarios, 1 being in person, 2 being hybrid, and 3 being distance learning. So each area is addressed for each scenario. So if you looked at transportation, what does it look like in scenario 1? What does it look like in scenario 2? In scenario 3, all distance learning transportation is not needed, so don't need to provide that during distance learning. So one of the differences when you look at scenario 2, as far as transportation goes, we've got bus capacity at 50%. So some of those are a little bit different as you go from scenario to scenario, but a lot of them would be the same. Scenario 2 just might have a little bit extra precautions. So we talked a little bit about screening, so that was talked about earlier in this meeting as well. Face coverings, there's a page on face coverings, what that all means. And then we get into the arrival and some of those other areas that are specific to the middle school, where students enter, and so forth. Then Mr. Hickey talked about student pods being at the middle school. So I know that Mr. Sprung and myself are putting students into what we're calling learning pods / their homeroom. So all kids will be assigned to their pod, and they will transition and attend classes with that pod as much as possible. We have students that attend special services such as special education, ELL, intervention services. They may join students outside of their own pod for those classes. As far as recess and lunch, they will have their lunch in the classes like they do, like Mr. Hickey had said, so lunch and breakfast will be in the homerooms as well. Then it gets into the health and safety, hygiene, all those areas. So this will be provided to the families and gone through at conference time, attendance policy, grading policy, visitors, all of those areas. So this is not a complete document, as you can see, but it will be completed by the end of the week. So I want to talk a little bit more of the instructional model for each of the scenarios. So in-person learning will be very typical to a regular classroom day. There'll be the cleaning procedures. Students will have to wash their hands before they go into the classroom. So each classroom either has a sink with soap or a hand sanitizer dispenser. So when they walk in the room, the first thing they do is do their hands. At the end of the class, they will clean their work area. Desk, if that's where they're at. So they'll clean that and then head out. And then the next group coming in, wash your hands, sit down at that desk, that's when sanitize. That happens in scenario 1 and 2. Once they're in the class, the in-person will be very, very similar to how we deliver instruction normally. We do know that we will have some students attending distance learning due to their family situation, which is totally fine. Those students will attend synchronously, which means as the class is happening. So let's say I have a kid on distance learning and their first class is math at 8:15. 8:15, they're expected to be on their device with their teacher, getting that instruction that way. That's how attendance will be taken. So teacher will look around, take attendance like they normally do, look at their board to make sure they got everyone that's distance learning in class. They'll be marked present, and that's how we'll take attendance for that. So then also the lessons will also be recorded. So if there's a student, let's say, that misses first hour, they can go back in at the end of the day, click into their first hour Google Classroom and get that content that they missed first hour. Now, unless they notified us beforehand that my child will not be available for first hour, it'll be an unexcused absence. If they let us know that my child will not be attending first hour, we know that, we'll put that in our attendance, that student has an appointment, it's an excused absence. So we'll follow the excused, unexcused, and it's just gonna be a lot of communication between parents and the school. And like Maggie, like you said, it's a community thing. We have to all, as a community, as a district, this year, more than any other, the communication between home and schools will be vital, and very, very important. So when you look at, those kids that are on distance learning in the in-person scenario, they will go to each of those classes, like I said, at their regular time. We'll provide them with their schedule, times to log in, where they need to be, and so forth. So they will attend synchronously as much as possible. If they miss something, then they can go in and also do it afterwards, because it'll be recorded. Get into scenario 2, we look at the hybrid model. So this would be about 50% of our students attending on one day and 50% on the next. And Friday kind of being that enrichment for the kids that don't necessarily need to come in, but intervention for those kids that do. So those would be determined kind of as an as-needed basis. We have a spreadsheet right now that we've listed who had trouble last year with distance learning. We've talked to special education teachers, I've talked to ELL teachers, and they've identified some students that they would recommend that would come in on that Friday as well. So I would anticipate on our Fridays that we'd have just as many kids in the building on Fridays as we would any other day. I would suspect that we'd have about half of our kids here on Friday as well. In the hybrid model, just like the kids that are home for distance learning, the kids that are in hybrid, that day that they're not in school and they're virtual, they'll be expected to attend synchronously as well. And that option for doing it after school, if they miss, is going to be there too. So, and then scenario 3 with the all distance learning, all students would be participating via the Google Classroom, kind of like last year. The one thing that we would include is more of the synchronous piece. Although we know everybody was in distance learning, that was a little bit more of a barrier on things. So we don't want to make it completely synchronous all the time, but we want to have more than what we did last year. I think last year was a good starting point, but we definitely need more of those interactions, small groups, those types of things. So we are committed to doing that. If we were to go all distance learning, which I hope we don't have to do, that means the numbers are pretty high in the area. And yeah, safety is number one thing. So, you know, with all the precautions that we're going to be taking, and the hand washing and the cleaning and the sanitizing, the school year is going to be much different than a typical school year. And will some instructional time be lost because of these precautions? Absolutely. But we want to make sure that we see and have the kids with us as much as possible. And working with the teachers that I worked with to develop this plan, you know, we want all the kids with us all the time. We just do. And however we can make the best out of each of these situations, we're going to be committed to providing the best education we can to kids no matter what scenario we're in. So, any other specific questions as far as the 3 scenarios instructionally, what that looks like?
Are you gonna have other things you talk about, or is it? I don't know if my questions apply specifically to those, so.
I will, if there's no questions on the instructional piece, I just wanted to touch base on what the conferences will look like.
Instructional piece, probably.
Okay, that's fine. You can answer those after that. So, we're going to be sending out conference sign sheets, 20-minute conferences, on that Tuesday workshop week, and there'll be individual conferences. So the student will get a folder, and in that folder there'll be either a purple one or a yellow one. Purple is this is for the hybrid piece. So kids are divided into a purple group and a gold group. So if you get the purple folder and we end up in hybrid, you know that you're a purple day, you're a yellow day. Within there, we're going to have several documents. One would be the one that you guys have right here. And then also some supplemental materials, like what are the symptoms of COVID? So here's what to look for. Keep your kids at home, those types of things. Also, decision trees, if you test positive, if your family tests positive, what is the protocol to follow? So there'll be lots of information there for parents to look at. It's like, okay, what do I do in this situation? We're gonna try and provide as much of that up front as we can. So if things do come up, we can reference those or provide those to other families that we may not have provided during this session. But then also working with families, you know, what the expectation is for all these areas during that conference. So students will also get their Chromebooks at that time. If they don't have them, so that'd be grades 4 and 5 and 6. And then students that are distance learning have chosen the distance learning option if we're in-person or hybrid. They'll also pick up their school materials that day. So even if you attend distance learning, you can still attend the conference in person and get all your stuff. So that's kind of the gist of the conferences for that part. So now I will take the questions.
Does Google Classrooms allow for teachers to video monitor the students that are watching their videos non-asynchronously? So the ones who couldn't make it to the designated time but choose to watch it later? Are they able, is the teacher able to see, okay, yeah, Johnny did, we want Johnny to go and watch that video later, right? It's really important. Is the teacher able to say, yeah, Johnny went and watched it, or, I don't know?
In a roundabout way, yes. It's kind of difficult because what would have to happen is Scott Ripley would have to go and say, hey, this computer was on at this time and watch this.
Okay.
So we could be able to get that. Also, GoGuardian, if teachers have that on, which we don't expect them to have it on at 7 o'clock at night, but that's when they know that what the kid is doing from there. But it'd be hard, you know, other than having a button saying, yep, I watched the video, and that the kids hit the button. There's really no perfect way to say that they watched it, but we know if they completed any assignments or participated in discussions or anything like that.
With 7th grade being in your building, is it, and this may be a Dr. Keller question, is it possible that we could apply for a waiver so 7th grade would follow whatever, or would it make sense to apply for a waiver so 7th grade would follow whatever the middle school is doing? So the whole building is kind of on the same schedule versus a 7 through 12 K through 6 model? Is that possible?
It would be possible to apply for a waiver for that.
And would it make sense, yes?
And Mr. Huntley can speak more to whether or not it would make sense. In my estimation, I don't think it would necessarily make any difference whether the 7th grade was following the middle school schedule or if they were on a hybrid as the only group from the middle school on a hybrid.
And I would think about that specific question too. And for me, I would say that if 3 of the 4 grades are in person, would it make sense to have the 4th one? Sure. I mean, I can definitely support that argument, and we could certainly ask for that. So it is a possibility, and I would support it.
Would, just a question, I don't know the answer to this. Staffing wise, would it be a factor?
Staffing wise would not be a factor because typically, I mean, even if we're in hybrid or in person, they're gonna have their same schedule regardless. So the schedule is gonna be the same, it's just the amount of kids that are in that grade or in that class. So, as far as staffing goes, I don't see that would be a barrier.
Is there no potential that the elementary school, right, could be on, hybrid and or distance and the.
Elementary probably in person and the secondary not.
But my question is, the opposite could occur too, right or wrong?
No, it's the elementary, in every scenario, the elementary is going to either be on a less restrictive or at the same level of restrictions. there aren't any scenarios where the elementary would be more restrictive than the secondary.
I couldn't recall from seeing the chart previously. And this is a Dr. Clark question too, and I apologize for taking your time, but, do we get information from the Department of Health on who our positives are? So if Janie goes into the clinic and tests positive on Tuesday and comes to school on Wednesday or Thursday, we know, or are we just getting idea that a 12-year-old girl in Montevideo tested positive?
We're supposed to receive information relative to who it was.
Okay.
I not at Prairie Lakes.
It does not come as quickly as what they were talking about last spring. When they were presenting this to us last spring, they quite literally said that the Department of Health and the school district would know before anyone else did. That's not happening. But
Thank you.
I've been in choir working a hybrid model.
So band and choir in a hybrid model, so I did space out the choir room. And we can get 6 feet between, well, we have half of our class there, right? So I know we can get half of our students in there 6 feet apart.
And they sit behind face masks and play their instruments behind their face masks?
Nope,
You can take them.
You can take them off though?
face masks can be taken off for eating, drinking, performing, singing, playing instruments, acting.
Performing covered by it then.
Physical activity. Certain kind of physical activity, I'm pretty sure it did, didn't it?
I think probably is on the list of things where they don't have to wear masks.
Yeah, and, that would make sense and hopefully that,
Yeah, it says during indoor practices.
Right.
So that feels like fighting.
At these things.
most of our, I hopefully will be outside. At least the first few months.
Till January.
Till January, right? So.
My question is about lunches in general, so I'm assuming that all schools will get the same lunch. Is it gonna be like a pre-packed bag lunch, or will it be a warm lunch?
we're starting out the year with cold lunches and then plan to progress from there towards warm lunches. But they will be in individual containers, even if they are of warm.
And will they be disposable containers, or will they be like trays that then the whole tray goes?
No,
No.
no trays.
No trays, okay.
Can we ask him?
I just,
Yeah,
I'm concerned, like, we're at synchronism and a fourth grader is at home by themselves and they don't have, or with the high school student, they're out their sibling and they can't get on
Okay.
with their teacher, because we're supposed to have reliable internet service too, unless I'm home and they have no Wi-Fi. MPTV is pretty erratic during the day, especially when there's thousands of families on. How are we going
So
to
that's-
understanding of that?
That's where communication comes in, right? So that, we understand there's gonna be a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different situations that come up in a different family. And the main thing that we wanna to share is that we're gonna be supportive of those situations, okay? So let's say synchronous learning just doesn't work for me for X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, let's figure out a specific plan for you on what's gonna work for you and your family. That's kind of how we wanna set things up. Kind of have these expectations, but we know we're gonna have to shift a little bit for some different scenarios, and that's totally fine. So it's just communication and make a plan. So.
So I'll play Joe this time. So what would you do for school? What would you go back to?
You said the principal.
What's your preference? If you-
What's your
Keep them
preference?
out of the school.
Well, I think it's very important that we do follow the guidelines set forth
Right.
by the state.
Yeah.
I mean, they set those guidelines for a reason, and I do think that I would follow what they recommended us to do. I wouldn't necessarily say that I would go more strict or even less strict. like I said, I'm not a doctor, and I would do what is recommended by our current doctors, because I think it is a fluid situation.
Right.
Ultimately, do we want all kids back in? Absolutely. If I have a perfect world, right? So.
Remind me, the learning pods that you talked about at the very beginning, those would be, would those be in place even if we were 100% everyone back in?
Yes.
Okay, so this year you're gonna try to implement learning pods for any of the loans?
And that was a recommendation put forth by MDH, is to
Yeah.
recommend those
Makes
pods.
sense, yeah. It can decrease the opportunity for spread.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we go to bed.
Thank you.
Soon.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
And now we'll have Mr. Sprague. Okay.
Hey.
Oh, you're here, okay.
Okay. I'm good.
Okay, Joe's, we're waiting on.
Okay.
It's interesting seeing you in the room because watching on the screen, the picture is so little that
Yeah.
We just put the good looking ones on the screen.
We're gonna switch around.
Over there.
I was gonna say,
You're your camera. Travis, don't worry.
No, I'm sorry.
Travis should get his camera time.
I should be the one over here.
I even cleaned up for today.
I get enough Zoom meetings and remote video hearings in a week. Wow.
Zoom meetings, I'm zoomed out.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, I am.
okay, so you've heard a lot of stuff from a lot of principals, or a couple of principals. And some of what you're gonna hear from me is similar, some will be a little different. If you wanna take, Sean and my base plan are very similar. How they are implemented in each individual building will have some tweaks, okay? So I'm gonna start from the standpoint, what does the day look like for my kids with everybody there? Because when we come back, it's not gonna look the same as it did last year,
Right.
right? So to start off with, we used to have an open house, and we're not gonna have an open house. We are going to have individual meetings with parents. We're gonna do ours every 15 minutes apart, so we can get 3 in an hour and have time for cleaning in between.
Right.
During those meetings, teachers are going to actually hand out the Chromebooks, teach parents how to initially log in, hand them the passwords, because our kids and our first graders haven't used a Chromebook yet. And we need our parents to know how to log in. When we start school, we feel that it's going to be important that a lot of the first week, when we start school in normal year, a lot of the first 2-3 weeks is about teaching procedures and processes. We're adding to that procedures and processes how to use a Chromebook. Because you don't know when we're not going to be there. The other things we're going to put more emphasis on in terms of procedures and processes is how you should wash your hands. What is 6 feet apart like? You know?
No more system.
In a classroom, I know you heard that we need to keep as far apart as possible. That's not 6 feet apart in a full classroom. But once we get in the halls, that is 6 feet apart. When we get to the restrooms, in our boys' restrooms, we're actually going to close off a couple of the urinals because they're too close together.
Right.
And teachers, instead of sending all boys and all girls in, they're going to have to go in by little bits.
Yeah.
Okay? So that'll be part of the initial processes of what we teach kids. As we, in terms of how we enter school, now we just heard some of the things about screening, and that will be a change because that's new. So remember, things have been changing daily, so what I'm telling you today could be different tomorrow. When I talked to my COVID startup team last night about screening at the door is now different based on information I found out today. Okay, we are still gonna have people posted at the doors. And we're gonna do the reminders, we're gonna have the screening things, you know, how's this happen? Do we know that some parents have some utilitarian needs that they're probably gonna tell us yes, when it's no? Yeah, that's gonna happen, that happens every year. Every year, we have kids who throw up and then tell us they threw up before they came to school too, right? So screening at the door has never been the magic bullet. Temperature's never been the magic bullet. We're not temperature, so well, we're gonna remind people about screening, but that's not gonna keep kids out the door. We are making a change, we're only opening our doors at 7:45. We don't have the luxury, because what the guidance says is, once kids enter, they gotta go straight to the classroom. Now, in the past, my first kid got there about the same time I did, which is 7 o'clock in the morning. I don't have the luxury. I don't have staff there. But while it kills me to have kids wait outside, I can't take responsibility for kids at that point because they gotta go straight to the room. And I don't have staff there. So staff will report at 7:30, that will be a change. At 7:45, we'll start admitting kids. All bus kids will come in the parking lot door. All the kids on the east side of the school who are not riding the bus will come in the front door. All kids on the west side of the school who are not riding the bus will come through the 4th Street entry. That's part of our keeping our people apart. When kids get to the classroom, their breakfast will already be there for them. Okay, so they'll get there, they'll eat breakfast. Teachers will do their morning activities. If the teacher feels that the kids need some outside time, they have the ability to take them out for a short recess themselves. In terms of, we've rewritten the schedule. So those of you who have had kids go through my building will have known that generally they've gone with a classroom partner to lunch, to recess, to music and ed. And that classroom partner was generally across the hall. That was to facilitate teachers working together. Now I want to facilitate kids not meeting each other in the hall. Okay, so when they go to recess, it's going to be somebody from the east end of the building and somebody from the west end of the building. Music and ed will now be 45 minutes long, and they will only have one every other day. Okay, one day music, next day ed. Somebody coming to music will come from the east end of the building, somebody will come from the west end of the building, to minimize kids coming in contact with each other. We used to have music and for 15 minutes. It's going to be 45 with 10 minutes in between classes to give those teachers an opportunity to clean whatever they need to clean between classes. Music and teachers will do as much as their classes outside as possible. When they do their class outside, they're actually going to meet their kids closest to the door to the classroom and not at the gym or the music room. Because they have 10 minutes in between class, so they have time to get to wherever they need to get to. Lunch will be in the classrooms. It will be brought to you. I know you've heard an extensive discussion from Sean about that. Something a little different in my plan, because of the number of parents in my building, I'm going to try and pair a teacher and a parent to work together. And they will be paired, and the parent will provide for the special ed and some of the other learning needs. That will also allow them to be a learning team to help service anybody who might be online distance-wise at the same time, to give each other a break, so that way teachers get a break when we go out to recess, and then when Parent comes in, the teacher takes over and gives the parent a lunch break. And so having two people responsible for a classroom helps manage the break times that teachers need without exposing people throughout the building. Because that's not how we used to manage our parents. They could be in 3 or 4 classrooms during the day. That's not really what we need at this point. It also helps teachers kind of manage what's in front of them. Title teachers will be assigned to a select group of classrooms and only be using those classrooms. We're still toying with maybe titles, even though we're in person, reaching those classrooms via those kids via distance learning while they're in the classroom. So we're not contaminating classrooms with somebody and kids all over. Okay. I'm still playing with dismissal and how is that going to stay there, waiting for some information from you all need to make so that I'm able to do that. Because 300 kids in the hallway, it's not going to work. Sick kids. Those of you who had kids go through my building, what used to be the computer room, now I'm talking about an ESL room. ESL is moving, titles moving somewhere else. That will be the sick room. So anybody sick with COVID symptoms will go there. Parents who will be called, anybody who can't pick up their kid within a half an hour will make use of our community resource officer to do it. And this is so I don't have, last year we had kids waiting 3 hours for their parents. And we can't do that. We don't have the resources to do that because as soon as I have a kid in that sick room, the nurse is down there. The reason it's there is the guidance says kids have to wait somewhere where well kids, while we need to see the nurse, are going to be infected. Okay. Bathrooms we talked about. Library. We can't have kids browse books, so we're going to have to teach them how to use the online catalog. And the jury's still on about how much actually in the library we're going to be able to use. We'd like Bernie to be able to do some of the things she's done with kids, from kind of ensure distancing, and the kids will not be touching the book. For those of you who have done kids, you know what that's like, correct? The same is true of teachers' classroom libraries. They can't be available for kids' browse. Now, teachers can assign those. They can get them back. They can leave them sit for 3 days before they're cleaned, the outside covers, and then redistributed. Okay. I think we talked about some kids, career assignments, open those doors. Now, for kids, families who opt to do totally online while we are all in school, we've had a number of we're going to do synchronous learning for reading and math when possible. Recognizing it may not be possible for some families. And then the other classes like music and fire, they're going to be much more like the distance piece that they have. And we ask the music teachers and fire teachers to provide that jointly. So how does that look different in a hybrid situation?
We're talking that one big question with in-person, if that's the direction to go. Your building is one that they share lockers. So and we have no room to put more lockers or bins in backpacks and everything. So is this just going to go as normal, or is that going to change?
No. So they might still end up sharing lockers. But how we're going to assign lockers, because they're still crunched, even if they weren't sharing lockers, they'd still be crunched together.
Right.
We want them to work with the teachers across the hall from them, so that Mrs. Douglas's kids won't be all in just this locker bank. Every other locker will be her kids, and some of her kids will be over here. Now, at the end of the day, her kids come out, they grab their crap, they get back into the room. Mrs. Blum's kids come out, get their stuff, they get dressed in the room. So the kids aren't in the hallways during that time. So that's how we're going to try and cut down with kids being so crammed together. We're still going to have to share lockers. And there's just not going to be a way around that. I think outside of every classroom, there's about 17 lockers. So, hybrid. The difference is everything that I just said will remain in place, except for half the kids will come Monday, Wednesday, half the kids will come Tuesday, Thursday, and a number of kids who need some extra work, didn't benefit from online learning when we did it this spring, will be coming on Fridays. There might be some kids in a hybrid, some of our multiply handicapped special ed kids, online doesn't work at all. They might come in every day. So kind of depends on the kid's needs at that point. So we're looking at Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, synchronous classes for reading and math, when possible, recognizing that that doesn't work for all of our families. But that's why then we have parents available to help contact. We're going to use a Title I people a little bit differently when we're in a hybrid or disciplinary situation, which they're available to help make contact with kids. Because the important thing is to continue to develop the relationship, keep kids engaged in the learning. Most of the Monday, most of the split on A to L and through Z lines, but I did have to switch some. Was able to do that mainly with kids that are the only kid in the family. So, which is why we're calling purple and gold days, because it's not purely an A to L and to Z. Okay. Other than that, most of what I just told you would be the same, other than they would be 6 feet apart in the classroom at all times. Even in hybrid, it says you can bring them closer together for some instruction. I'm just a little concerned. I want to see how this goes. By the time we've got, if our school goes into hybrid, that means our county has more than doubled their data numbers. And so I'm concerned about encouraging bringing them together for instruction, and we know that we got more than double numbers in the county. And then distance. We learned a lot as we went through distance learning. And those of you who might have had kids in my building would have found that, yeah, we started out mainly with videos, and then we saw that kids were starting to slip away, and we saw that what you would have seen is lots of small group instruction happening throughout the week. Not every day, but throughout the week to bring kids in, to start keeping them engaged in learning. We learned that as we went, and I know Mr. Ripley has been able just to be showing just through our Google Meet hours how much time our staff actually spent with kids online in small groups and individuals. Large class for distance learning does nothing. And I tried a large staff meeting distance learning. Wasn't going to do it again. People don't get to talk. You don't get to see expressions. Just so even my staff meetings became small group meetings, a series of them. Other functions will continue, like our PST teams, our CST teams. Discipline will continue similarly. You talk through the rest things with Sean. We look at that very similarly. Questions you might have for me?
This could have been asked to any of the administrators, but I'll tell you I'm evading even the question. So, what material is being developed to help families understand how they should clean these masks that we're going to give them?
We're still talking about that actually. Okay. We may not ask families to clean masks. Okay. We know that we're buying 2 per every kid, and the state's going to buy 1. We may ask kids to leave the dirty mask in a basket on the way out the door, hand them a clean one as they ride the bus. And we have the ability, we have a washing machine and a dryer. It may be the night custodian's duty to wash the masks. We're still having that discussion. we might go that route because frankly, little kids have filthy masks. And unless we're gonna teach them how to launder them on a daily basis and have a place to hang them in the classroom.
Yeah, that's the approach I was kind of hoping to hear.
We might, so it's do we teach them how to do it themselves, but not really have the room to do it? Or do we try to accommodate that, make use of the 3 masks we're gonna have for every kid? Now, we're not gonna label whose mask was whose. We're gonna assume when they get them back, they're clean. Okay?
All the masks, like what you have color, that one is that what each?
Bob sent us an email
What
with
they-
the mask, and we're like this.
Okay,
Yeah, they're your shape, but with.
okay.
So that's kind of what we've been thinking about. That's not solidified yet.
Yeah, I get it.
We're still working on some things that way.
I think that's a good idea to ask to wash them ourselves.
It's the best certainty you have of having clean masks.
I don't wash a little laundry in 3 days, so. Got a washer we've got a washer that is the largest.
We
one
thought
of
you,
the time.
we thought you had to watch closely.
I don't ever wash clothes, no.
maybe watch it the way I want.
I don't know, okay, I don't know how often my kids wash our clothes, but I don't think it's every 3 days.
No, and, you know, little kids notoriously don't realize when their noses are running.
Yeah.
They, we know we're gonna have kids who spit up in them. I mean, our kids are less likely to do self-care.
Yeah.
Well,
I have a question about prep hour. I know in the past, it's kind of been done when the teachers are, or when the kids are at, for teachers when the kids are at math, or Five and music, thank you. With Five and music being shorter time, are teachers going to be still getting their full prep hour?
sure, so let's talk about that a little bit. So our contract says 250 minutes a week, and so Five and music at 50 minutes a day allows for 250 minutes a week. Also says a 25-minute lunch hour, so when kids aren't eating at lunch, that's actually the 25-minute lunch hour. But the 25 minutes of recess is additional time. If they go to the library and they don't have to bring their kids to the library, that time in the library once a week or twice a week is additional time. So the 45 minutes a day is just the beginning. The recess time continues to be that 25 minutes of additional time. They'll have less additional time, but they'll still have more than enough prep time in the contract.
More than contracted.
More than contracted, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then my next question is keeping families together on days. And you split A through L and M through Z. I know you said that there's some flexibility. Is there also the understanding, are we looking at families with multiple last names where Johnny, okay, that was
Yes.
taken into account.
So where we started is, we went by actually the guardian's last name,
Oh, okay, I remember that.
not the kid's last name. And kids in multiple households, if we have kids who are in multiple households, and they have different last names, we just picked a last name of one of the guardians.
Good.
Okay?
Very good.
And they were split, and with split by going through A through L and then through Z, we were able to have 2 groups district-wide come within 3 students of each other. Then, beyond that, as the respective building principals would look at their needs, then they could look at the possibility of moving people from one group to the other group, so long as they were just impacting their building. So if it was somebody that had a child in every building, they couldn't move them unless every building needed that child.
So there are, I suppose, of my 13 classrooms, 10 of them I had to tweak. And it didn't go. Only one child that I had talked with Sean about, can we move this family? The rest, I was able to move single kids.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
And now we'll have Mr. Gray.
Dr. Hill, did you?
No more sports questions.
While we're switching,
Yes.
so the idea is that we get questions, we'll talk more about this on Monday at our regular board meeting. The idea is that our plan is as final as it can be, probably towards the end of next week.
Right.
And then it's submitted, it's approved, it's published, all these things, and then, so really in the next 7 to 10 days, that stuff's been happening.
Right.
Okay.
Agreed, thanks, have a good night. You know, after listening to all three, I don't have a ton to add because they really kind of covered everything, one way or the other.
So you were the one that asked to change the order around then?
I might have said, you know what, I'm tired of, I might have said I'm tired of going first. Put the pressure on somebody else. And actually, and then Mr. Sprung commented that, you know, I want to go after Mr. Huntley because if you notice, Bill talks, and then Sean says, you know, mine's a lot like Mr. Sprung's. So mine's a lot like Mr. Sprung's. You know, a couple of differences, you know, distance learning, really, what he said is, we've talked and we'll be following the same things. We'll make a couple changes. We used Seesaw as our main delivery system last spring. We will change to Google Classroom for consistency. For a couple of reasons, you know, easier for parents, obviously, because we have to have the parents helping those kids. Kids can't log in, they can't do anything when they're 5. The other thing is that I look at kindergarten, part of our job is to prepare kids for their future education. Well, Google Classroom or something of that nature is never going away in education. So part of our job is to get them prepared to be able to use that specific platform to move forward. You know, it might change to a different platform 5 years from now, and we'll have to use that one, but that's the reason for that. Otherwise, distance learning, the other thing, as Mr. Sprung mentioned, is more contact face-to-face. We got better at that as it went, but that's something we learned. We didn't know how to do that. Now we're very good at that because we've been doing meetings like this for months. And hybrid-wise, the only thing really different is, as I said last time we met, was we'll go half days. Mornings and afternoons, splitting kids up. And sped kids, again, would do every day, half day with their gen ed class, and then 2 days stay into a full day so that they get all their other services in as well. But otherwise, you know, kind of what Mr. Sprung said, oh crap, I left something on. I'm gonna run and get something in a second. Because it answers some of the questions you had about, you know, distancing and how are we gonna teach these kids. Well, you tell a 5-year-old 6 feet, he looks at you, oh no, I only have 2 feet. You know, because that's where their brain is. So we've got some spots, dots that are gonna go on the floor. And if Mr. Hickey or Mr. Sprung's out there listening, maybe they'll grab it, bring it in here quick. So that you see what we're doing to help with that, because at my building and Ramsey specifically, you know, they don't understand that. So even talking about the urinals, we're gonna close up the urinals. Well, there's gonna be a spot in front of the ones you can use. If you can't stand on a spot, you can't use those things. There's not gonna be one at the drinking fountain. You can't use the drinking fountain. You know, that's how we're gonna try and teach them that. And that's really the kind of the only differences in hybrid for us. In-person is in-person. They've explained that pretty well. We will distance as much as we can. And as I kind of do the numbers with 20, 21 kids in a classroom, we can pretty much get to 4 to 4.5 feet with their little area to stay in. Some of the things we're doing there that we can do that maybe some of the older kids can't do is each kid will have a tub with their stuff in it. So all their manipulatives, all their pens, pencils, you know, everything they need will be in their tub. When they're done, they put in their tub goes over here. Now there's no sharing of any of that stuff to try and keep that. And then we don't have to disinfect it every, you know, hour when it switches. So, you know, we're able to do some of that because we are self-contained. Mr. Sprung talked about traffic. You know, we have a traffic plan. Really, it's a one-way street. Kind of, there's an outdoor and then there's an indoor. When you go outside for recess, 2 classes will go, one will go playground, one will go grass area, and the next day switch. So you get kind of the same stuff. So, you know, that's really kind of the only differences. Other than that, I'll just say, what questions do you have that you haven't asked yet?
So maybe could have been asked of Bill also, but like for your buildings where you have young kids that don't have older siblings, and from the most compounded scenario, they're a single parent family, what happens when it's a hybrid model in kindergarten for half the other day? Where do they, I mean, how do you balance the childcare struggle for those?
We're required, just like the spring, if we go to hybrid, we're required to provide childcare
For the other-
charge.
For the,
To those essential employees, still the essential tier 1 employees, depending upon numbers and staffing, we'll offer it to as many people as we can. Tier 1 would be free.
Yeah.
Anybody else would be charged, but we are required, and we visited with a couple of local churches because we're needing space. And we have, approval arrangements, I don't know what you want to call it, with 2 churches to use their space if they need to.
okay, all right.
Did I get off that easy?
Quick question I asked earlier, this is more if we go distance learning or student who's learning, are they eligible to play sports? It's more today.
Have you been watching the YouTube feed, because that question was on there?
Was it? I gotta ask the question.
Yeah, there's no guidance yet. Obviously, the decision was just made today, what's even happening with athletics. If I go by current bylaws, they would be ineligible because they're not in attendance. And they do have to attend, physically attend, they have to be in school. That might change.
But they might change that with this.
It could, there's a lot of things that may change in the next week or so with new decisions earlier this morning. My stance on it would be if a family's uncomfortable sending them to school, they should probably be uncomfortable sending them to practice too.
Yeah.
Because there's gonna be less social distancing in a sport other than probably tennis. There's gonna be much less social distancing on a football field or volleyball court or cross-country run than there is, so it's probably, safer in school actually, even though we'll do as much as we can. But I'd say from a parent standpoint, the decision should be consistent.
Right.
And I think the league's probably gonna say that too.
Is it true that football and volleyball were moved to spring?
Football and volleyball will move to spring, and all I know is it's spring. I don't know what that means yet.
Right.
Because they just said spring, somewhere between March and May is all that's out there. There's been no specifics yet. I'm part of a small group that meets every week. And we'll meet tomorrow with the league. There's about 30 of us that represent different parts of the state. And then Thursday, there's a large all AD in the state meeting. And I'm assuming that tomorrow and Thursday, we'll start to hear some of the specifics about what that really means and what 70% of your schedule and 80% of the season, or what those things really mean.
They talked about six games of football.
Yeah, but the league didn't say that. Some newspapers said that.
And so is it the newspapers that are also saying about this 4th season, or is that something the league is
The
talking about?
newspapers are saying that. Yeah. I did see something on Twitter, but I think it came from
What they say?
somebody other than a league staff person that said there was 4 seasons.
Yep, that volleyball,
Fall, winter, spring, and summer.
that all the traditional spring sports are gonna move to this summer
What the
season.
league said was, what I would, they didn't use these terms, but in my brain, I said fall, winter, early spring, late spring is kind of how I looked at it, because they talked about the traditional spring being done sometime in June. Well, that's not summer. We're barely into summer, so it might back up a week or two. And it'll be, my guess is they'll all be shrunk. They'll be shortened of some sort, which in the spring, we shorten them anyway.
Yeah.
So Mother Nature takes care of that for us, so.
And it was early, as in, well, if yours, they did that, but how many do you anticipate volleyball girls are all gonna go out for tennis and maybe football players are gonna maybe run cross country, right?
Hard to say.
And then you have
It's-
the coaches and then you're ready to go with them.
I think it'd be okay if kids do, but football and volleyball can still practice this fall too.
They can practice?
Yeah. Not everybody read everything that came out. So it was moved to the spring for competitions, but football, volleyball, as well as all the spring sports that lost their season last year can practice this fall. So baseball can practice, softball can practice, track, golf, boys tennis can practice in the fall. So again, that's all, that was just on Twitter from John Millay, who I trust. I know John fairly well, I was on the board. So I trust that what he's saying is true, because he's sitting at the board meeting doing that, which I wish they wouldn't personally, I would like to see them wait, make the decision, send it out as one document where it's all there, because now everybody's making their assumptions and newspapers are reporting things, just like last week. Local control, well, that's not what it is. So now you got all these questions and people panicking and they get nervous and, then other dumb things get out there and pretty soon there's way too much confusion. So I'm hoping tomorrow and Thursday we'll be able to clean that up.
Can a student baseball player practice baseball and practice football?
I would say yes. I mean, they can do 2 sports in a season now, so there's no league rule against that.
They can play football and baseball next year.
Well,
It's been brought
from
to
what
our
I got, it would be at the same time, and I hope it's not.
Right.
There's gonna be an overlap, but we have overlap in every season.
I mean, what
That
does?
they could play football and then also play baseball, or play football and then run track.
For the same reason that our spring sports, you said, get shortened. How you gonna have football in March when we show? We have fun, but.
And we're down here, what about those north of 94?
Yeah.
Where, we got 8 inches of snow still in March, they got 8 feet of snow still in there. They built turf baseball and softball field because of that, because that's a spring sport. They don't have turf football fields, because that's not been an issue. They're ready to deal with that for baseball and softball, but they're not at all ready for football.
In the past, I think on one occasion it's been brought to the board of allowing a student to participate in 2 sports in the same season, and I think we turned them down, correct? The board did? I don't think we approved that request, did we?
I don't know that it's ever come to the board. In my 21 years, I don't remember it coming to the
We had a
board.
student that wanted to run track, participate in track, and participate in baseball, and came to the board.
We've had kids do that, actually, yeah.
It's interesting, I'm sure we had that come up, and we discussed it.
Not that I recall.
I'll look back.
I'm a proponent of that.
I know
I
back
am-
when
I am
my high school day, there
150.
was a student that did that.
We-
I'm 150% in favor of that.
That was less than 20 years ago, so I feel.
How about other activities like plays and musicals and things like that?
Nothing said yet. Nothing yet. And some of that, the plays and musicals are ours locally. The only thing that the league would be involved in would be one act play speech. Even math teams.
The other thing though about, that you have to remember about plays and musicals is going to be whether or not they're allowing large gatherings.
Sure, so they may not be, they
That,
may
that
not
falls
according
into the
to
same
it on it.
type of a category as an assembly.
Sure.
Which is the same for athletics. I'm
Yeah.
waiting to see if the league will help us out and make a statement about spectators. I mean, I have my personal thoughts, but, that's a concern of mine, is, spectators and how to control that. We talk about kids, we have some control over kids sitting where they need to sit and wearing masks and sorry guys, but adults are worse than kids to deal with. We've been wearing masks at the Thunderhawk and Junior Thunderhawks now for a couple weeks. Kids have been pretty much fine. We struggle more with adults listening. So I'm not really looking forward to supervising an event where I have to be the mask patrol too. So I'm hoping they put some guidance and some seriously limits on spectator attendance, and it's parents only. I'd love parents only. The NBA and Major League Baseball is nobody. So maybe we need to look at that and follow that. There's a reason they're doing that, because that's tough to control. There will be no concessions at anything this fall. That was already guidance from weeks ago. That's some candy I'm gonna give away. It's really old, whatever. Any questions?
We don't have any more athletic questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Next time I'm going first.
I could have asked this question, I should have asked it of Scott, because it probably is going to pertain to him the most, but how are we going to manage math? Is that going to be like a detention type thing? Is it going to be a we're educating, re-educating?
It's
In
If
the,
they're not gonna wear them?
no, if
So,
a kid's being rebellious and not wearing the
yeah,
mask.
if your kid comes in and says, my mom and dad say masks are a piece of crap, I'm not wearing one, your kid just opted for distance learning.
Okay.
And we've had that where kids have said, because we've been doing this a couple weeks now, kids have said, my parents think I don't need to do this. We said, well, I'm sorry, but that's not an option here. And the kids have been fantastic.
Yeah, I can foresee at a younger age, they
Up
want
through,
to.
you know, you got some fifth graders, I think, and they've just been really, they just do it.
If you want to be in school, you have to wear a mask.
Right.
That's just the way.
Nobody likes it.
And if they want to open enroll somewhere else because we're requiring it, everybody in the MERV is using the same criteria. They don't put the mask on, they opted for distance learning.
Good, okay.
So
And from the people out there watching who may not know what the MERV is,
it's the Minnesota Urban Valley Ed District, and that would be Ortonville, Yellow Medicine East, Benson, Dawson Boyd, Lac Parle, RCW, Minneota, Lakeview, and Montevideo.
I have to logo everything.
I love it.
We could have bought generic, you know, whatever color, it was red and blue, I think. And I didn't really like that. I think we need to make it something
Right,
that's,
looks
you know,
good.
Monterey specific, so we're gonna have these all over, all over the hall.
Looks good.
Where do we get them from?
I don't know, can I say that?
Yeah.
BC Slams did. I
can you show it down the camera so people can see that?
don't know, how do you show it on the
I
camera?
don't know, just hold it up.
I can't tell if,
Yeah, make sure it is.
yeah, we can get closer to the camera.
Thank you, Bob.
They'll be all over the place.
Okay.
We're on 2.2.
Okay. The renewal of the operating referendum, we have two opportunities as we look at our operating referendum to renew that. It will expire after next year.
After 21.
Yeah. So we have, and operating referendums, unlike bond referendums, have to be run in November.
Okay.
The two opportunities we have are this November
And next.
and next November. Those are the two chances to renew that, at which time it expires. The operating referendum itself is pretty important to us, as that is how we are funding our technology initiative. That's how we got our one-to-one Chromebooks in there. That's how we got the interactive whiteboards that we had originally, the smart boards. That's how we're getting this type of a view screen in
Sure.
all of the classrooms. That's the way that we're paying for that. Mr. Ripley has done a very good job of managing that and putting together a rotation system where we can keep everything so that it is self-sustaining as long as the referendum's in place.
And updates as
It updates as we go, as we move through. If we don't have the referendum in place, we can't afford to just slide this into the general fund, because we'll be losing a very sizable amount of revenue. So what we've done is we've worked with Ehlers, who is our financial advisor that works with they work with a lot of school districts, a lot of cities. In addition to working with us, they also work with the city of Montevideo. And so we both do utilize the same financial advisor. They took a look at it, and with our referendums currently, we're not maximizing our tier 1 funding from the state. And so tier 1 funding going up to $460 a pupil unit, that would be paid about 55% by the state for our district. That's how it would be equalized. So if you look at the tax impact statement, that has the two questions up at the top, question 1 and question 2. And both of these have the same ultimate impact. The first one just breaks it into 2 questions. It goes for a renewal of the $156.76, and down below it shows what the tax impact is, going from $50,000 to a $550,000 piece of property. It shows the net change with the passage of that question as 0. That's because it's already in place. You're just renewing that levy. Then it goes to the second question, which would be $303.24, and that brings it up to the $460, and that's where we fully maximize our tier 1 funding. We get the best bang for the buck out of that. That's where we get the most
And the one thing we
state aid.
need to let people know though, this is not farmland either.
That's right, it is not. This is on agriculture, on the agricultural community, it's on the house, garage, 1 acre. And the tax rate is the same for all property on that. So whether it's a business, residential, the farmstead, it's all the same, at the same rate across there. So, and that's been in place for quite a while on that. So on question 2 then, that shows the tax impact, and that's actually the increase in taxes for each of those pieces of property, and it's on, the increase comes on the second question.
That assumes that 55% equalization or whatever you said?
Yes.
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 Okay.
That's a way of question 1 and 2.
Question 1 and 2, that's the way that
We can't just do 1, right?
yes. So the tax impact between 1 question and 2 questions, the tax impact is identical. All you've done is you've eliminated having it broken into 2 different questions. If it's in 2 questions, you might get 1 pass, 1 might fail. However, if it's 1 question, either it all passes or it all fails. But if you look at and compare the 2 sheets, you can see that the net change for the single question is the same as what the change is.
And this is in a year, not per month, correct?
Right,
Yeah.
it's a year,
It's a year.
that's per year, that's the increase per year. So it allows you to look at what it would do to be in 2 questions. It also allows you to give some thought as to whether or not you want to fully maximize the tier 1. If you want to go at a lower level, you're still going to end up getting quite a bit of that picked up by the state aid. You're not going to get the most possible revenue from the state. If it's at the percentage isn't going to be quite as high. But you are still.
This will be on our board meeting on Monday?
This will be on Monday.
Okay.
We're looking at that. And we need to make a decision on Monday, or if we can't make a decision Monday, we need to look at the possibility of holding a special board meeting prior to the 21st of August.
Should be over here somewhere.
So, questions on this?
I don't have any questions. I mean, the tax implication isn't that high. You know,
No,
so, and that's a nice thing, that's, you know, it's a low amount, but, yeah.
And it's money that can go directly into programs, into materials that'll be in the hands of kids. It's, you know, it's operational.
Tier 1 is operational.
This is an operating levy. It's to keep things running. It's
And
to.
156 stays with the technology part, and then the rest.
Right, and actually, we would probably put a little more than the 156 towards that.
Just to keep up with it.
Just to keep up with inflation, and, we're gonna get, you know, we're starting to get, originally, we hadn't anticipated that we were going to push taking the devices home all the way down to first grade.
Right.
And now we are, so now we're gonna have to start looking at making sure we've got cases for them and stuff like that. So it increases the cost, and it's also gonna increase a little bit on the repair side for Mr. Rick. Because as younger kids transport them, there's probably a greater likelihood that of having accidents occur than with older kids.
Little less true. So passing this in November of this year, the students are benefiting that from in the fall of 2021.
Yeah, it would go on the ballot this year, but it doesn't come into effect until next year.
Yeah, right. I mean, again, the turn is really less than a year from vote to impact students.
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
3.1,
I move that we adjourn.
anyone want a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Roll call.
Roll call vote, Andrew?
Aye.
And Maggie?
I.
Travis, sorry. Kelly?
Aye.
And Joe. Thank you.